right. As you consider New Year's resolutions and things that you're going to do in the next year, I want to encourage that you nurture a quality, an attribute, just something that you can do that permeates nearly every aspect of your life when you start to think about it. And with this, people of all ages can truly build a successful life and a meaningful life, and will find blessings beyond their wildest expectations. So if you're a kid in here and I say you want to be a success, this is the one thing you should be doing and thinking about. And if you do it, God's going to hear you and He's going to be near you. And in Proverbs 22:4, it summarizes what I'm talking about, which says, "By humility and the fear of the Lord are riches and honor and life." So by humility and the fear of the Lord, riches, honor, and life. And the question, as I was studying this, why were so many good things coming from humility and so many blessings that come from this attribute? And you think about it, it goes with the theme of lift him up. If we're going to lift Christ up, we're going to have to go lower. But let's look at the anatomy of a humble person to determine the answer. So we're going to look at the heart, the head, and the hands of a humble person to try to figure out why are there so many blessings here. The first thing is the heart. And a humble person recognizes what they are. And what I mean by that is they agree with God about what they are. When God says there is none righteous, no, not one, they agree with that, yep, that's me. I am not righteous. And they wholeheartedly admit that they're sinners. They agree with the fact that without me, you can do nothing. That anything that goes on in their life that's good is because of God. We wouldn't be here without Him. Everything we have is because of Him, and so forth. And even let nothing be done through strife for vainglory, but in lowliness of mind, let each esteem other better than themselves. And so they actually value other people above themselves and say, what could I learn from this other person? Or how can I help this other person? So what's the result of this attitude? If you have a heart of humility, one thing that comes is that you have a deep and loving relationship with God. And they're extremely thankful for what God has done for them. I went through this when I was, up until I was 19 years old, didn't know God. I went to church and all those things, but didn't really know Him personally. And at that age, I suddenly, after reading the Bible and being witnessed to, recognized what I was for the first time and recognized what God had done for me. And it ignited a love that had never been there before. All of a sudden, I wanted to live the Christian life and wanted to do those things. And it just drove so many things in my life because I recognized what I was. And that's why everybody must be born again, and why Christ said that. There's no Christian life. This is so foundational. If you don't recognize what you are, and we don't recognize what we are, how can we do anything? Humble people will trust God because they recognize, wow, He did all these things for me. How could I not trust such a good God? They'll forsake sin. They'll trust His leadership. They'll trust Him through the storms, as Brother Noyes was discussing. And they'll be content and thankful with whatever God gives them. And so they have a really good relationship with God. Another thing that happens for someone that has a humble heart is they'll build strong relationships with others. They're going to spend more time trying to fix themselves rather than fix other people. And they'll recognize that I have my own problems here that need to be taken care of. They'll confess their faults. They're not going to downplay their mistakes. They're going to admit those mistakes. They're going to use the words, I was wrong, which is not always easy to say when they mess up. And they'll go easy on other people. If other people make mistakes, they recognize, you know what, they're sinners just like me. I'm not going to bring down the hammer. I have my own problems. Let's take it easy and favor mercy instead of justice. And so they're kind of like the oil in relationships, and they keep things moving smoothly. Another thing that humble people do is they find success in God's authority structures. And what I mean by that is there's all sorts of authority structures, whether it be in the home, at work, in the church, in the society, whatever it is, and they recognize that, and they value that. And they say, you know what, I don't look at people who are over me as overbearing or these other things. I understand they have a different perspective than I have. I am not in their shoes. And so I'm going to go along with the system. I'm going to support them, encourage them, and try to do everything I can to help them. And so you can see a humble person, just, how do you keep someone like that down? It's kind of like those blow-up toys where you knock it over and it just pops back up again. They just make things go with God, with other people. So that's the heart, what they are. The next thing we'll look at is the head and what they know. And humble people realize their own wisdom and knowledge is extremely limited. They don't know everything. And therefore they rely on God, who does know everything, and they rely on others who know more than them. And they recognize, one of the big things they recognize is that the fear of the Lord is the beginning of wisdom. And so they take great effort to study the scriptures, to make sure they can glean everything they can from the scriptures to help themselves in life, make good decisions, and avoid bad ones. I grew up as the baby in my family and was quite a bit younger than my brother and sister, and there was a lot of good benefits from that. If you're smart, you'll say, that wasn't a good idea. I don't think I'm going to do that. Or that turned out pretty well. Maybe I should do that. And we, as Christians, have the Bible, and we know that these things are written for our examples. We can take the scriptures and use those things to avoid all sorts of mistakes. Humble people will do that. They won't bang their head on the mistake and not trust that wisdom. Humble people are swift to hear and slow to speak, and they spend more time listening than talking. They realize that we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason. Maybe we should listen twice as much as we talk. They don't see themselves as the most interesting or knowledgeable person in the room. They're not know-it-alls, they're learn-it-alls. And so they're asking questions. They're trying to understand, hey, what do you know that I don't know, and how can I learn from you? Humble husbands are willing to seek and listen to the complementary wisdom of their wives. They're not threatened by that. They actually see it as a valuable thing. Humble wives are willing to listen to their husbands, even when they may not understand, and that can be a tough thing sometimes. Humble children recognize they have a lot to learn in life, and so they're going to trust that wisdom of their parents and say, I think they've been through this before. Maybe I should listen, and maybe I should try to follow that. Humble workers seek advice and input from their coworkers. They don't know it all. They're going to say, what could I learn from you? And they could get smarter as a result. Humble managers are not afraid to learn from their people that report to them, to say, hey, they have a perspective that I don't have. I could be a better leader if I understand their perspective. And they're not afraid about that. And basically, humble people are not afraid of appearing dumb for what they don't know. And so they seek to learn from anyone. They don't care who it is that will teach them. And they're going to grow from that. So they grow in wisdom. They make good decisions. They find solutions that are better than what they ever could have come up with on their own because they're humble enough to just learn and be willing to learn all the time, anywhere, anytime. So that's the heart, that's the head, and lastly, the hands, what they do. So humble people recognize the importance of God's leadership and guidance in their life. Like Jeremiah, they say, O Lord, I know that the way of man is not in himself. It is not in man that walketh to direct his steps. I remember being newly married and thinking, I have to lead this home. How am I going to do this, and what am I going to do? I remember walking out of the hospital with our first child thinking, okay, this is us now. We've got to raise this child the right way. I think of my first job or big projects at work that I've had to do or ministries that I've had to undertake and do, and those feelings where you just don't know what to do. And humble Christians are going to go to God regularly, looking for his help and directions to make decisions and go the right path. Like, Lord, which way should I go here? You look in the Bible at people like David, Joshua, Gideon, and how they got their battle tactics from God. I mean, okay, go by the mulberry trees, or go march around Jericho, or go do this. It made no sense oftentimes, but they were smart enough to say, I don't know what I'm doing, but God knows what he's doing, so let's go with his plan. Abraham's servant was another example of that, who said, I've got to find a wife for Abraham. Please help me here. And God guided and directed him accordingly. And so humble people go to God for big things, little things, everything in between, and look for his blessing and guidance. And because this, they limit their boasting about themselves and their own exploits, because they realize anything that's happened here is because of God. It's not, look at the business that I've built over here, look at the ministry I've built, or look at this, because they recognize that God did it all. And we don't want to be like Nebuchadnezzar, that, look at this beautiful Babylon that I've built, and days later he was on his hands and knees in the wilderness. So humble people feel extremely blessed that God is willing to use them in his work. And so they're willing to do whatever it is. They'll consecrate their bodies as a sacrifice to him. And they understand that they have a responsibility as messengers of God to other people. And so they're going to align their life to say, you know what, they're more important than me. I have to be a good testimony. I have to do what's right so that I'm not a stumbling block to them. And so as a result of this, they're like putty in God's hands. And God can do whatever he wants with them. And so he uses them greatly. And you see that throughout the Bible, God's blessing on the humble. So it's interesting, just to close, so the head, heart, and hands. But as we close up here, it's fitting that God chose Peter to pen 1 Peter 5:5, which says, "Likewise, ye younger, submit yourselves unto the elder. Yea, all of you be subject one to another, and be clothed with humility. For God resisteth the proud, and giveth grace to the humble." Peter was transformed from a proud disciple. He thought he was better than others. He could minister in his own strength, and he often acted before seeking God's advice. But he became a man of deep humility, and God used him greatly, as we know. And so we too can be used of God, but only if we take the path of humility. And the other interesting thing is this verse talks about being clothed with humility. And if you think about that, it covers every aspect of our life. And it just in some of the things I explained. And if you study more about it, you'll even find other areas that it bleeds into. And when we're willing to do this, God can just bless so many different areas of our life. And he'll hear us, he'll be near us, and he can use us greatly. So may 2023 be one of humility and riches and honor and life.